Look at these satellite images of Mexico City's buildings, historic sites, and streets. They all seem to exhibit a growing number of cracks and crevices, and hidden from the surface eye, the same thing is happening to sewage, gas, and water lines in the city. At first glance, you'd be inclined to attribute this to the strong earthquakes that sometimes strike Mexico City. But while earthquakes can cause their own damage, they're not the main culprit here. Instead, it's something much more foolish. Terrible design. Mexico City is a geographical nightmare. It's the pinnacle of terrible design, and whilst researching this city, I've struggled to comprehend the choices that have been made here. But the worst choice of all was to use this place as the capital city of Mexico in the first place. See, the city is at a pretty high altitude, but sits lower than the mountains surrounding it. Therefore, it kind of acts like a ball, which is a really bad thing for multiple reasons. First, because of the city's high altitude, oxygen levels are 25% lower. This means that fuel does not combust effectively, which creates a lot more pollution. And since the city is in between mountains, it means that all the pollution created can become trapped. This is why breathing in the city can be quite difficult, and even before COVID, people wear face masks to protect themselves against the pollution. And this air pollution greatly contributes to the residents' cardiovascular and respiratory illnesses. So it really baffles me that Mexico decided to make things worse by literally burying and paving over its rivers, ultimately making the city dry and dusty, further contributing to these illnesses. Now, Mexico did this in order to try and overcome waterborne illnesses like cholera. And it seemed like a good idea, not only to help people avoid sickness, but also provide more land for the city, which was growing rapidly. But obviously that didn't turn out as intended. But surprisingly, this isn't even close to being Mexico City's greatest problem. Oh no, it only gets worse from here. See, it turns out that Mexico City is sinking, rather quickly in fact. This map shows the rate of sinking, and as you can see, there's a lot of red areas. Red meaning the land is sinking by 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch per month, which is an absolutely insane amount. But it's not actually the city sinking that's the biggest concern here. It's the fact that different parts of the city sink at differing rates. This is a problem because it breaks apart the infrastructure that sits above ground as well as below ground. And the reason for this is what lied here before Mexico City, as Mexico City was effectively built on Lake Texcoco, which was drained partially by the Spanish so they could use the land for greater construction. The building continued until the lake effectively disappeared. This placed considerable weight upon an already weakened dry lake bed. In particular, the building of skyscrapers placed too much weight on the unstable foundations, which in turn makes the sinking much worse. Subsequently, Mexico City is sinking at almost half a meter per year. Researchers have estimated that in the next 150 years, some areas in the city could actually shrink by almost 20 meters. Now, this doesn't just affect buildings, it also affects the underground infrastructure like sewage, gas, and water lines, which Mexico City has actually tried to overcome in the past when the city invested a lot of money in a modern sewage system which was completed at the end of the 1800s. It was meant to try and deal with the flooding problems and sewage issues which were affecting the city. And in theory, such a system should be able to cope with the demands posed by lots of residents. Yet, the existence of subsidence means that this sewage system can't operate anywhere near its capacity, possibly as low as 30% sometimes. Now, the city has recently spent almost $2 billion on a new sewage tunnel, which hopefully will help stop flooding and control the sewage flow. Yet, in late 2021, the city suffered some severe floodings which cost the lives of 14 people just north of Mexico City. So it seems this new sewage infrastructure isn't working as intended. And that might have to do with Mexico City's flooding issue. Owing to the geography of Mexico City, rain and spring water runs down from the mountains and collects in the city. This can cause flooding, and if parts of the city sink deeper, which it will, it could mean that the natural drinking water will be contaminated by damaged infrastructure like sewage. But owing to more of Mexico City's terrible design, the city is actually already experiencing problems with access to water, as failing to offer a system for reusing wastewater or collecting rainwater has meant that they are now struggling to meet the growing demand posed by an increased population. The failure to collect and harvest this valuable wastewater and rainwater means that the city actually loses a massive 200 billion gallons of both via crippled sewers like the Grand Canal. So, if Mexico City can't use the underground water, where does it get the water from? Well, the city planners have instead installed massive pumps to draw water from local rivers. What's left of them at least. But it turns out this isn't enough, as the city's daily water demand is more than 10 million gallons a day. So, the city has to import almost 40% of its water supply from other sources. But owing to really bad design for the water network, almost 40% of this is then lost through almost 8,000 miles of pipes because of leaks and other losses. Yet, despite these efforts, 1.1 million homes in the city lack access to water. And the government acknowledges that almost 20% of the city's residents can't rely on the water supply. Critics say this underestimates the true number though, but the government is trying to help residents in need in a rather unconventional way by providing trucks full of water. But these are rather unreliable and there simply isn't enough of them, as it's common for residents to wait at home all day to try and get access to the water delivered by these trucks. Competition for water is fierce and sometimes causes heated arguments among residents, understandably so. But circling back to the city's bad decisions, it turns out that these trucks sometimes draw water from the aquifers 300 meters or 1,000 feet below ground, which is hardly going to help the subsidence issue we looked at earlier. But if you're poor in Mexico City, you have another worry hanging over your head. You see, Mexico City sits in a vulnerable position when it comes to earthquakes. And in 1985, the city was struck with a massive earthquake measuring 8.1 on the Richter scale, which killed 5,000 people, damaged almost 100,000 buildings, and left millions without access to water. And since 1985, the government has strengthened building codes and emergency planning, which is great, but there's a problem. This does not extend beyond the tourist areas to the informal settlements. Here, people build shelters with whatever they can find and simply hope for the best. Building codes and formal construction requirements are effectively meaningless here, and estimates now reveal that approximately 60% of the city is made up of these unregulated, informal, and vulnerable zones. And these areas are continuously growing due to Mexico City's population increasing from 13 million in 1980 to nearly 22 million in 2019. And as we know, massively increasing populations poses lots of problems, especially when the city is as densely populated as Mexico City. You see, the 4 central city districts account for 53% of jobs, but house only 19% of the city's population. This creates urban sprawl, where people have to travel from outlying suburbs to their places of work, which shouldn't really be a problem as this is typically just the responsibility of public transport. But that's not something you can rely on in Mexico City. You see, while the city does offer mass transit, it hasn't kept pace with the increasing number of residents. The subway system, for example, was built to accommodate a maximum of 4.5 million people, but is now used by 5.5 million. The system is therefore struggling under the weight of its population's pressure. The subway is actually one of the world's busiest, with 6 people crammed into every meter of space during peak hours. Add to this the subway and bus network that don't feature particularly good connections either to many neighborhoods throughout the city. This in turn makes them less useful to travelers. I mean, who wants to use public transport which doesn't even get you to where you need to go? Subsequently, Mexico City is a very congested place. In fact, it is one of the most congested cities in the world, as residents have to spend approximately 90 minutes in the metro and bus network to get to their destination. Now, the government has big plans to invest almost $1.6 billion in the city's public transport to provide a cable car system built around the city's outskirts and additional trains for the metro system. Yet, these plans will take a long time, and the longer the situation remains as it is, the more challenging it can be to resolve. The result is that many people don't use the public transport system and thus rely on private vehicles. As a result, there's almost 5 million private vehicles registered in Mexico City, and many people who drive into the city do so with vehicles registered in other states. The result is that the city is very congested, with residents spending 227 hours stuck in traffic jams every single year. None of this is helped by the fact that Mexico itself is one of the most unequal countries in the world. We can see this nationwide inequality in Mexico City. Here's a picture of a nice golf club, where right next to it we can see the extent of the urban sprawl. While many struggle with housing constructed from basic materials in settlements on the periphery, the city hosts private golf clubs which cost on average between $16,000 and $35,000 per year, with the most expensive club over $100,000. So yeah, with Mexico City we can see the effects of truly terrible design in a number of ways. Mexico City faces many different problems, including social, environmental, and geographical problems caused by its poor design. All in all, it's gonna be interesting to see what ends up happening to this city. But that's it for this video, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.